The unexpected gift. Naomi Rivers had always been a fighter. At 32 years old, she had spent the better part of her life battling a series of illnesses that left her physically drained but mentally resilient. It all began in her early 20s, when what was supposed to be a routine illness turned into something much more sinister, an autoimmune disorder that doctors couldn't quite pinpoint, but one that would shape Naomi's world for years to come. She learned to live with it, each flare-up taking more out of her than the last, but she kept going. There was always something that needed her, someone who depended on her strength, so she pushed through. But as the months wore on, the battle became harder. The treatment regimens were unrelenting, and the endless hospital stays felt like they would never end. Yet, Naomi kept going. She took on work when she could, volunteered when she could, and tried her best to maintain the life she had before the illness defined her. That's why, when her father called on the last day of the year, Naomi wasn't sure she'd heard him correctly. She had always known her father to be a man of power and influence, a self-made entrepreneur who had risen from humble beginnings to become one of the most respected figures in the tech industry. He was the kind of man who believed in action, in seizing opportunities, and in always striving for the best. He had done everything he could to help Naomi when her health faltered, but he'd also pushed her to stand on her own 2 feet. For him, it wasn't just about giving, he wanted to see Naomi succeed on her own terms. "Naomi, I've arranged something special for you," he said, his voice full of warmth, as if the years of tension between them had evaporated in an instant. "I know you've been through a lot, and I think it's time you treat yourself to something special. I've booked you a first-class ticket to Paris for the holidays. Take the time to rest, explore, and just be. It's your time, honey." The words hit Naomi like a wave. She had never imagined she would experience anything like this. A first-class flight to Paris? It felt like a dream, an indulgence she didn't believe she deserved, not after all she had been through. Her father was giving her more than just a gift. He was offering her a chance to escape the constant weight of sickness, to have a moment to herself, away from the daily grind of hospitals and treatments. The moment she heard the news, Naomi was flooded with emotions, gratefulness, disbelief, and even a little anxiety. She hadn't taken a real vacation in years. The idea of relaxing, of being pampered, felt foreign to her, almost as though she didn't belong in such an exclusive space. But her father insisted it was something she deserved. As the days passed and the flight approached, Naomi tried to push the discomfort away. She had always found comfort in hard work and perseverance, not in indulgence. But her father's words echoed in her head. Maybe it was time to let go. To enjoy life for once, without worrying about what tomorrow might bring. When she arrived at Asheville Regional Airport on the morning of her flight, the festive decorations throughout the terminal did little to calm her nerves. Holiday music played softly over the speakers, and the air was filled with a sense of cheer. Passengers walked briskly to their gates, their faces a mix of excitement and impatience. Naomi, however, felt like an outsider in this crowd. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. She had spent years blending in, living quietly, going unnoticed by the world. And yet, here she was, about to board a plane in first class, something she never thought she would experience. The moment she checked in and received her first-class boarding pass, Naomi couldn't help but feel a twinge of self-consciousness. It wasn't just the lavish experience that made her uneasy, it was the feeling of being different, of stepping into a world that seemed so far removed from her everyday reality. As she passed through the terminal and made her way to the first-class lounge, she couldn't help but notice how polished and pristine everything was. The lounge was peaceful, with soft lighting and comfortable chairs that looked too good to sit in. Naomi found a seat near the window, watching the planes taxi across the runway, ready to take their passengers to far-off destinations. She felt like she didn't belong here, like she was somehow out of place in this world of wealth and ease. But soon, it was her time. The announcement for her flight was called, and Naomi stood, adjusting the strap of her bag. As she made her way to the gate, she felt the eyes of other passengers on her, their gazes quick and fleeting. She couldn't help but notice the subtle differences between herself and the others who were boarding. Their clothes were perfectly tailored, their smiles polished and confident. Naomi, on the other hand, was dressed simply, in a soft sweater and jeans, comfortable but not luxurious. Despite the unease she felt, Naomi moved forward. She had earned this, even if she didn't yet feel that way. Her father had given her this opportunity, and she was determined to take it, if only to prove to herself that she was worth it. She had been through so much already, she told herself. She had faced down illness, isolation, and doubt. This flight, this moment, was just one more hurdle to cross. And she would cross it, even if she felt out of place. The first-class cabin of the plane was everything Naomi had imagined it to be, and more. The seats were plush, the service impeccable. The flight attendants greeted her with warm smiles, their voices calm and inviting. Naomi felt a pang of guilt as she sank into the leather seat, adjusting the plush pillow behind her head. She had grown so accustomed to discomfort over the years, hospital beds, cramped doctors' offices, uncomfortable treatments, that she wasn't sure how to feel in this new space. She looked around at the other passengers, many of them already settled into their seats, sipping champagne or scrolling through the in-flight entertainment options. Naomi felt the weight of their stares, even though most of them had returned to their own affairs. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were judging her, that they saw her as out of place in this world of luxury. And then, before she could even settle in, Naomi noticed the flight attendant approaching her. The woman was tall and slender, with perfectly styled hair and a stiff, practiced smile. She walked toward Naomi with an air of purpose, her steps measured and deliberate. Naomi straightened in her seat, trying to appear calm, but a wave of anxiety swept over her. "Excuse me, miss," the flight attendant said, her voice smooth but carrying an undercurrent of something Naomi couldn't quite place. "I'm afraid there's been a mistake with your seat assignment. We'll need you to move to economy." Naomi's stomach dropped. She had heard stories about this kind of thing happening to people who didn't belong in first class. She had watched videos and read accounts from people who were told to leave premium spaces because they didn't fit the image of what was expected. "I'm sorry?" Naomi asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She could feel the weight of the eyes around her, could feel the judgment before it was even spoken aloud. "This is my seat. I have a first-class ticket." The flight attendant's smile didn't waver, but it seemed even colder now. "Yes, miss. I understand. But there's been an error with your reservation. It's been flagged in the system. You'll need to move to the economy section." Naomi's heart raced. The air in the cabin seemed to thicken, and she could feel the pressure of the situation mounting. It was happening. This was it. She had been given something precious, something she thought she'd earned, and now it was being taken away from her. But just as she was about to stand, a voice interrupted. A deep, authoritative voice that cut through the tension like a knife. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice calm but firm. "There's been no mistake with this ticket. Please leave her alone." Naomi looked up, her heart skipping a beat as she saw the man standing in the aisle. He was tall, well-dressed, his sharp suit making him look like he belonged in a room of high-powered executives. His eyes were focused on the flight attendant, but there was a softness in his gaze when he turned toward Naomi. "Miss Rivers, please stay in your seat." The flight attendant hesitated, glancing between the man and Naomi. Naomi's confusion deepened. Who was this man? What was going on? "I'll take it from here," the man said, his voice carrying an air of authority that made the flight attendant step back. "Let me handle this." The tension in the cabin was palpable as the flight attendant turned away, visibly rattled by the interaction. Naomi watched her go, unsure of what had just happened, but grateful that the situation had been diffused, at least for now. As the man took a seat in the row ahead of her, Naomi leaned back, her mind racing. Who was he? How did he know her name? And why had he intervened? Little did she know, this would be just the beginning of a series of events that would change the course of her life, and ignite a firestorm that would affect not just her, but the airline itself. The unseen hand. The moment the flight attendant walked away, Naomi let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. She sat back in her seat, her fingers clutching the armrests as she tried to steady her racing heart. The tension in the air was still palpable, but the calm authority of the man who had intervened gave her a sense of relief, albeit a confusing one. Who was he? And why did he seem to know exactly what was happening? Naomi glanced around the cabin, her gaze shifting to the passengers seated nearby. They all seemed oblivious to the subtle power struggle that had just unfolded in front of them. They were lost in their own worlds, reading, sipping their drinks, scrolling through their phones. But Naomi could feel their eyes on her, the weight of their curiosity hanging in the air like a thick fog. She was an outsider here, an uninvited guest in a space that wasn't meant for her. She tried to shake off the feeling, telling herself that she had nothing to be ashamed of. This seat was hers. She had every right to be here, no matter how out of place she felt. But as her eyes lingered on the man who had intervened, she couldn't help but wonder who he was and how he was connected to the situation. His calm demeanor and firm voice had cut through the tension in a way that felt almost rehearsed. This wasn't some random passenger sticking up for her, it felt deliberate, purposeful. Naomi's thoughts were interrupted when the seatbelt sign dinged and the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now preparing for takeoff. Please ensure your seatbelts are securely fastened and your tray tables are stowed. Thank you for flying with us today. Naomi nodded absently, following the instructions, but her mind was still elsewhere. She wanted to relax and enjoy the flight, but the encounter with the flight attendant, and the mysterious man who had defended her, lingered in her thoughts. The cabin lights dimmed as the plane began to taxi down the runway, and Naomi allowed herself to close her eyes for a moment, focusing on her breathing. She had spent so much of her life focusing on surviving, on battling her illness, that she had forgotten what it felt like to just breathe, to be still. But now, with her seat reclined and the hum of the engines filling the background, she felt a small sense of peace settle over her. The flight was smooth, and for a while, Naomi lost herself in the quiet luxury of the first-class cabin. She was offered a glass of champagne, which she declined, opting instead for water. The flight attendants, who had been tense during the earlier confrontation, were now polite and professional, offering their services with smiles that seemed more genuine. Naomi wondered if the tension had subsided because of her father's mysterious benefactor, or if it was simply the calm that comes after a storm. As the plane soared into the clouds, Naomi's thoughts returned to the man who had spoken on her behalf. She had only caught a glimpse of his face, sharp features, dark hair, and a gaze that held an unmistakable confidence. His presence had been commanding, but there was something else in his eyes, something that made Naomi feel both comforted and unsettled. It was as though he knew more about her than she was comfortable with. For the first time since boarding, Naomi felt her anxiety start to subside, but a nagging curiosity gnawed at her. She needed answers. Who was this man, and why had he intervened? As if on cue, the soft murmur of voices broke her concentration, and Naomi looked up to find the man standing at the front of the cabin, talking quietly to a flight attendant. The same woman who had asked her to move earlier stood next to him, her posture rigid, as if she was being reprimanded. Naomi couldn't make out their conversation, but the tension in the air told her that the flight attendant was not being praised for her actions. The man glanced over his shoulder, and his eyes met Naomi's. He nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly, but she caught the movement. Then, with a smooth gesture, he excused himself from the conversation and made his way toward her seat. Naomi felt her heart skip a beat. She wasn't sure whether to feel grateful or suspicious. There was something undeniably compelling about him, but there was also something that didn't sit quite right. Why was he paying so much attention to her? "Miss Rivers," he said as he approached, his voice low but warm. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion. I wanted to make sure you're comfortable." Naomi sat up straighter, blinking in surprise. She hadn't expected him to speak to her directly. "I'm fine, thank you. But, if you don't mind me asking, how did you know my name?" The man smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I have my ways," he said cryptically. "But more importantly, I wanted to apologize for the disruption earlier. I'm afraid that flight attendant was acting outside of the airline's official policy. This flight should have never been an issue for you." Naomi narrowed her eyes, still trying to process the situation. It felt like she had a personal issue with me. Was that part of the policy too? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced over his shoulder, making sure no one was listening in. "Let's just say that sometimes people let their biases influence their actions. Unfortunately, this wasn't the first time something like this has happened with certain staff members." Naomi was taken aback. "Are you saying this wasn't an isolated incident?" The man nodded slowly. "Exactly. And that's why I took it upon myself to step in. I won't allow anyone to mistreat you or anyone else on my watch. Not when they've earned their place." Naomi felt a flicker of gratitude and suspicion at the same time. She had heard the whispers, the subtle judgment from other passengers, the looks that told her she didn't belong in this space. But this man, whoever he was offering her something far more valuable than just an apology. He was offering her respect. "Thank you," Naomi said quietly, unsure of what else to say. "But, if you don't mind me asking, who exactly are you? I'm just a little confused about how you knew what happened." The man's smile remained, but there was a glimmer of something else in his eyes. "Let's just say that I'm someone who pays attention to detail. And I believe in protecting the people who matter." Naomi tilted her head, intrigued but still cautious. "People who matter?" He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "You're important, Miss Rivers. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Before she could respond, he straightened up and gave her a final nod. "I'll let you get some rest now. But if you need anything, don't hesitate to ask." With that, he walked away, leaving Naomi in stunned silence. Naomi sat back in her seat, her thoughts swirling. Who was this man? And why had he singled her out? His words were so enigmatic, so charged with hidden meaning. She had always prided herself on being independent, on not needing anyone's help, but this man had a way of making her feel as though she was part of something much bigger than herself. Something important. As the flight continued, Naomi found it harder to relax. The mystery of the man lingered in her mind like an unresolved puzzle. The flight was no longer just a break from her routine, it had become something more. She felt as though she was standing on the edge of something significant, though she didn't know what. And little did she know, the events that had started with a simple act of kindness were about to spiral into something much bigger, something that would make her question everything she thought she knew about her father, about the world, and about herself. Unraveling the web. The hours seemed to drag on as the flight continued its journey across the Atlantic, the rhythmic hum of the plane becoming a constant backdrop to Naomi's swirling thoughts. The man who had intervened earlier had been kind, but his cryptic words only served to deepen the mystery surrounding the situation. She sat there, alone in her first-class seat, looking out the window at the endless stretch of clouds below. Her mind was preoccupied with one question: why had he gone out of his way to protect her? The flight attendants were polite but distant, their smiles now tinged with something Naomi couldn't quite place, perhaps guilt, or maybe just apprehension. It was clear that things weren't as simple as they had appeared when she first boarded. She had been given the gift of a luxurious flight, but it had been tainted by that brief confrontation with the flight attendant, followed by the enigmatic intervention of the man. She was no longer sure of where she fit into this picture. For the rest of the flight, Naomi tried her best to push the questions to the back of her mind. She read through her book, listened to music, and even tried to close her eyes and sleep, but her thoughts kept returning to the strange encounter. Who was this man, really? And why had he been so determined to ensure that she remained in her seat? As the plane descended toward Paris, Naomi felt a subtle shift in her emotions. She had been on many flights before, but this one felt different. It wasn't just the luxury of the first-class cabin, or the strange sequence of events that had unfolded. It was something deeper, something that tugged at her instincts. There was a sense of destiny in the air, as if her life were about to change in ways she couldn't predict. The moment the plane touched down at Charles de Gaulle Airport, Naomi felt a sense of relief wash over her, but it was accompanied by a renewed sense of urgency. It was time to step into the unknown. Naomi's arrival in Paris was a far cry from the quiet, nondescript airport she had grown used to back home. The bustling energy of the city seeped into the terminal, with passengers hurrying to and fro, their faces lit with excitement as they began their travels. Naomi's pulse quickened as she made her way through customs and baggage claim, her eyes darting nervously as she searched for signs of the man who had intervened on her behalf. She didn't know why she was looking for him. Perhaps it was a desire for answers, or maybe something deeper, something more personal that she couldn't quite put into words. But after a few moments of scanning the crowd, she saw nothing. With a sigh, she collected her suitcase and made her way to the exit, where the cool Parisian air greeted her as she stepped outside. The city was alive with possibilities, but her mind couldn't focus on them. Something was off, something was looming just beyond her grasp, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Her instincts were proven right when, as she walked toward the taxi stand, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, her brow furrowing when she saw the text message notification. Unknown sender, I hope you're ready. I'll be waiting for you at the hotel. Naomi's stomach sank as she stared at the message. It was only a few words, but they felt heavy with meaning. She didn't know who this person was, or how they knew where she was, but something about the words felt familiar, as if she had known this moment was coming. Naomi had been down this road before, unexpected messages, cryptic notes, but this one felt different. There was no way to ignore it. The game had shifted. She quickly scanned the hotel booking confirmation email she had received earlier. It was a small boutique hotel in the Marais district, far from the touristy parts of the city. Naomi had specifically chosen it for its quiet atmosphere, hoping for a peaceful retreat, but now she wasn't sure if she would even be able to relax. Her hands trembled slightly as she hailed a cab, her mind racing with possibilities. The ride to the hotel felt long, as though the city itself was holding its breath in anticipation of whatever awaited her. She could feel the weight of the message pressing down on her chest, suffocating her, even as the Eiffel Tower came into view in the distance. By the time she arrived at the hotel, it was nearly evening, and the streets of Paris were bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. She paid the driver, her mind still a whirl of confusion, and stepped inside the hotel lobby. It was a small, charming place with exposed brick walls and old-world Parisian charm. The receptionist greeted her with a polite smile, and Naomi checked in, her gaze flicking nervously toward the back of the lobby. "Your room is ready," the receptionist said, handing her the key. "We've arranged a nice view of the city for you." Naomi nodded absently, taking the key and making her way toward the elevator. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end as she stepped inside, pressing the button for the top floor. She tried to shake the feeling of dread that settled over her, but it clung to her like a shadow. When she reached her room, she opened the door and stepped inside. The room was as quaint as she had expected, with antique furniture and delicate curtains that framed the windows. But what caught her attention wasn't the room's charm, it was the neatly folded note on the desk. Naomi's breath caught in her throat as she walked toward it, her hand trembling as she picked it up. The note was simple, handwritten in elegant script. "I knew you'd make it here. We have much to discuss. Meet me at the restaurant downstairs at 8 p.m. sharp. Her heart pounded as she read the note over and over. There was no signature, no clue as to who had left it, but Naomi had no doubt in her mind, it was the same person who had sent the message earlier. With only a few minutes to spare, Naomi forced herself to change into something more presentable, a simple black dress that she had packed for the occasion. She wasn't sure what she was walking into, but she knew she had to meet this person. There was no turning back now. As she made her way downstairs, her steps were heavy, each one filled with uncertainty. The hotel restaurant was tucked away at the back of the building, its warm, golden light spilling out into the hallway. Naomi pushed the door open and stepped inside, scanning the room for any sign of the person who had been following her every move. It didn't take long for her to find him. Sitting at a corner table, near the back of the room, was the man who had intervened on the flight. He was alone, his gaze fixed on her as she walked toward him. "Naomi," he said softly, his voice calm, but with an unmistakable weight behind it. "I'm glad you made it." Naomi's chest tightened. "How do you know my name?" The man smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "Let's just say I've been keeping an eye on you. We need to talk about your father, and why he isn't who you think he is." Naomi froze. The words sent a shiver down her spine. The web tightens. Naomi stood frozen in the doorway, her heart hammering against her chest. The man's words echoed in her mind, each one laden with a weight she couldn't quite fathom. Her father, everything she had believed about him, everything she had built her life around, was now called into question. The thought made her feel dizzy, as if the ground beneath her had shifted without warning. She took a tentative step forward, her mind racing. "What do you mean, my father isn't who I think he is?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, but her words hung in the air like a heavy fog. She was trying to keep herself composed, but the truth she had built her life upon was now being questioned, and that was a harder blow than any physical wound. The man gestured for her to sit down, his movements deliberate, as if he had been waiting for this moment. Naomi hesitated for only a second before sliding into the seat across from him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She tried to steady her breathing, to make sense of everything that was happening, but the storm of questions swirling in her mind was too loud. The man's gaze never wavered. "Your father," he began, his tone quiet but purposeful, "has been part of something much bigger than you realize. He isn't just some wealthy businessman who cares for his family. No, Naomi. He's been a key figure in a much darker world." Naomi's heart skipped a beat. "A darker world? What are you talking about?" Her voice trembled, but she couldn't stop herself from speaking. She needed to understand. He leaned back in his chair, his expression one of calculated patience, as though he were preparing to reveal a carefully guarded secret. "Your father is connected to an organization that deals with things most people would never believe existed. They are involved in the manipulation of governments, control of industries, and, perhaps most disturbingly, an array of covert operations that you would never imagine. His business empire is a cover, a smokescreen for what's really happening behind the scenes." Naomi's breath hitched as her mind tried to process the enormity of his words. The man's words were like a sudden gust of wind tearing through everything she had ever known, leaving her feeling exposed and vulnerable. I don't believe you," she said, her voice faltering. "My father has always been good to me. He's always been there when I needed him. He supported me when I was sick. He's not like that." The man's eyes softened, but there was no pity in them, only a kind of understanding that made Naomi even more uneasy. "I understand why you would say that. You've been protected from the truth, shielded by the facade he's built. But I can assure you, Naomi, that what I'm telling you is real. He's been playing both sides of the game for years, he's been involved in some very dangerous work. And now, it's catching up to him." Her mind reeled, her chest tightening with each word that left his lips. She had always known her father to be a man of influence, but she had never imagined him to be involved in anything like this. Her thoughts raced to the past, to all the moments when she had been shielded from the complexities of his life, his late-night meetings, his sudden trips, the secrecy that had always surrounded his work. But all of that had seemed so distant, so irrelevant, compared to her daily struggles with illness. She had never questioned his motives before. The man continued, his voice steady and unwavering. "Your father is in deep, Naomi. But right now, he's in hiding. He knows his enemies are closing in. And the truth is, he needs your help." Naomi's eyes widened in shock. "My help?" she repeated, her voice rising. "What could I possibly do? I'm just a woman who's spent the last year battling a sickness, trying to survive. I'm not some kind of agent or spy." The man's lips curled into a faint smile, though it was not one of amusement. "You've underestimated yourself. You've survived more than most people could ever imagine. Your strength is precisely why you're needed." Naomi's thoughts began to spiral, her mind racing as the gravity of the situation began to sink in. She had always viewed herself as fragile, a woman who had fought tooth and nail to survive, but she had never seen herself as someone capable of stepping into the kind of world the man was describing. It was a world of shadows, of power, and manipulation, far beyond anything she had ever thought possible. "Why me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Why am I the one who can help?" The man leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Because your father has left you a key, Naomi. There's something he's been hiding, something that only you can unlock. He knew that one day, you'd be the only one who could do it." Naomi felt a chill run down her spine. "What are you talking about? What key?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, velvet pouch. He placed it on the table between them, his fingers brushing lightly against it as he slid it toward Naomi. She hesitated, staring at it warily. "Take it," the man urged. "You'll need it." Naomi's fingers trembled as she reached out and picked up the pouch. It felt oddly heavy, as though it contained something more than just a simple object. With a deep breath, she untied the string and carefully opened the pouch. Inside was a small, intricately carved key. It was silver, but its design was unusual, too ornate for any standard lock, too delicate for something purely functional. Naomi stared at it for a long moment, feeling a sense of foreboding seep into her bones. This wasn't just a key. This was a symbol of something far greater, something she couldn't yet comprehend. "Your father hid this key for a reason," the man said softly. "It unlocks more than just a physical door. It unlocks the truth about everything he's been involved in. You need to find the door, Naomi. And when you do, you'll understand why it's so important that you step up now." Naomi felt a surge of emotions, anger, confusion, fear, all of them battling for control. She wanted to throw the key back at him, to walk out of the restaurant and pretend none of this had ever happened. But something deep inside her knew that she couldn't do that. She was already too far in. The web had been cast, and now there was no escaping it. "So, what do I do now?" she asked, her voice steady despite the chaos inside her. The man's eyes softened slightly, but his expression remained firm. "You find the door. I'll guide you, but the rest is up to you." Naomi took the key and tucked it into her purse, her fingers closing around it protectively. She didn't know where this road would lead, but one thing was certain, her life had just become infinitely more complicated. As she left the restaurant, the weight of the key in her bag seemed to grow heavier with each step. She knew that whatever was ahead, it was going to change everything. Into the heart of the storm. Naomi spent the next few days in a haze, her mind consumed by the strange revelations that had been forced upon her. The key she carried in her bag felt like a constant weight, as if it were pressing against her chest, reminding her of the path she had chosen to follow. It was a path she hadn't asked for, but one that had become inescapable. Every time she thought about turning back, about leaving Paris and returning to the safety of her normal life, the man's words echoed in her mind, "You need to find the door." The hotel, though charming, felt stifling now. The gentle hum of the city outside, the soft light that filtered through the windows, all of it seemed like a distant dream compared to the reality Naomi was facing. Her father was a man she had always idolized, her rock, the one person she had relied on through thick and thin. But now, with the knowledge that he was involved in something dark, something dangerous, she wasn't sure what to believe anymore. She didn't speak to the man again, but she felt his presence everywhere, like a shadow that loomed over her every decision. His cryptic messages, the hidden key, and his insistence that she find the truth, it all gnawed at her, pulling her deeper into a world she didn't understand. She had no idea where to begin, how to find this metaphorical door, but she couldn't ignore it. The weight of the mystery was too much. Naomi sat in the small cafe downstairs in the hotel, nursing a cup of coffee as she stared out the window at the Parisian street. The world outside appeared calm, peaceful even, but inside, her mind was a storm. She couldn't help but feel as though someone was watching her. Every passing face, every flicker of movement, set her on edge. She told herself it was just paranoia, the result of everything she had learned, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Her phone buzzed on the table in front of her, and she startled slightly before picking it up. It was a message from an unknown number, another one of those cryptic texts. Unknown sender, the clock is ticking, Naomi. You can't hide from the truth. Meet me at the old chapel in Montmartre. Midnight. Naomi stared at the message, her breath catching in her throat. The words were clear, this was no coincidence. Someone was guiding her, pushing her towards something she had to confront. She couldn't afford to wait any longer. The time had come to stop running from the truth. She quickly paid for her coffee, gathered her things, and left the cafe. The night air in Paris had grown colder, the streets quiet and empty as she made her way toward the legendary district of Montmartre. She had always heard about the old chapel at the top of the hill, a place where the echoes of the past seemed to linger in the air. She had never imagined she'd be here, chasing down cryptic messages and secrets about her father's hidden life. The journey up to Montmartre felt surreal, the narrow streets lit by street lamps casting long shadows across the cobblestones. The city seemed to close in around her as she ascended the hill, her footsteps echoing in the stillness. Naomi's pulse quickened, a strange mix of fear and anticipation tightening in her chest. The chapel loomed ahead, its silhouette cutting sharply against the dark sky. She reached the chapel's gates just as the clock struck midnight. The place was deserted, the courtyard eerily silent. Naomi hesitated for a moment before pushing the heavy wooden doors open. The scent of incense and old stone filled her senses as she stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim light from the candles that flickered in the corners of the room. There, in the shadows near the altar, stood a figure. It was the man, the one who had warned her about her father. Naomi's breath caught in her throat, but she didn't move. The man stepped forward, his presence commanding, his face shadowed but familiar. "You came," he said softly, his voice echoing in the empty chapel. "I knew you would." Naomi swallowed hard, her throat dry. "What is this? What do you want from me?" The man studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "I want you to understand, Naomi. I want you to see the truth." He reached into his coat and pulled out a thick envelope. It looked old, the paper worn at the edges, as if it had been passed through many hands over the years. He handed it to her without a word. Naomi took the envelope, her fingers trembling as she opened it. Inside was a stack of photographs, each one more unsettling than the last. The first few were of her father, images of him in various locations, but the places weren't ordinary. There were photos of him standing next to politicians, military figures, businessmen whose names Naomi recognized but couldn't place. But there was something far darker about these photos: hidden messages, cryptic symbols, and faces half hidden in shadows. As she flipped through the photos, one in particular caught her eye. It was a picture of her father with another man, standing outside what looked like an underground bunker, their faces intense, their posture suggesting secrecy. But it was the background of the photo that took Naomi's breath away. Behind them was a set of doors, old, iron-bound doors that looked like they had been sealed for decades. "That's the door," the man said, his voice low and urgent. "It's real. Your father has been hiding something inside that bunker for years. He thought it was safe, that it was buried deep enough to be forgotten. But the truth is coming to light, Naomi. And now, you have to decide, will you help him? Or will you walk away?" Naomi's hands shook as she stared at the photograph. She wanted to scream, to run, but something inside her refused to back down. Her father had hidden so much from her, and now the truth was within reach. She had to know what was inside that bunker. She had to find the answers. "Why me?" Naomi whispered, the words escaping her lips before she could stop them. "Why is it me who has to do this?" The man didn't answer immediately. He took a step closer, his gaze intense. "Because you're the only one who can. Your father trusted you, Naomi. He knew you would be the one to uncover it all." Naomi stared at the man, her mind spinning. She felt like she was standing on the edge of a precipice, about to step into the unknown. Her father had kept secrets from her, but they were nothing compared to what was waiting for her now. She had been given the key, the literal and figurative key, and it was up to her to decide whether to turn it. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the weight of everything sink in. When she opened them again, she knew what she had to do. The door was waiting for her, and there was no turning back. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady. The man nodded, as though he had been waiting for her to say those words. "Then it's time." The door unlocked. The journey to the underground bunker was not an easy one. Naomi had barely rested since that fateful night in Montmartre, and the tension that had built inside her since she accepted the man's offer had grown unbearable. The weight of her decision pressed on her chest, each step she took seeming heavier than the last. Her mind was a storm of questions, but one thing was clear: she was about to confront something that would change everything she had known about her life, her father, and the world he had kept hidden from her. She boarded a private jet the next morning, her flight arranged by the man who had become her guide in this perilous journey. His name was David, but his motives remained a mystery to her. He had offered no explanation for why he had chosen to involve her in this, or why he seemed so intimately tied to the secrets surrounding her father. Naomi trusted him as far as she could throw him, but she had no choice but to follow him if she wanted to uncover the truth. As the plane soared through the sky, Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that she was being pulled into a storm she could not escape. The further she traveled, the closer she got to the answers she sought, but with those answers came the undeniable sense that her life was no longer hers to control. The flight was long, and by the time they touched down at a small, private airstrip hidden in a remote part of Eastern Europe, it was already evening. David led Naomi to a black SUV that waited for them on the tarmac. The driver, a silent figure in dark sunglasses, didn't speak a word as they drove toward their destination. Naomi sat in the back seat, staring out of the window, the dense forest surrounding them only deepening her sense of isolation. The landscape outside was unfamiliar, and it was clear that they were far from any urban centers. There was no sign of life for miles, only the looming, oppressive trees that seemed to swallow the road ahead. The silence inside the car was deafening, and Naomi couldn't help but wonder what she was walking into. She had no idea where they were going or what awaited her at the end of the road, but she felt an undeniable pull toward it. Her father's secrets, the key, the bunker, it was all converging in this moment. After what felt like hours, the car finally stopped. Naomi looked out the window to see a sprawling complex hidden deep within the woods, the kind of place that seemed to exist outside of time and space. It was a fortress, its high stone walls topped with barbed wire, and the gates that guarded it were heavy, imposing. "Is this it?" Naomi whispered, her throat dry. David nodded. "This is where it all began. The place your father built to hide the truth. The bunkers beneath the compound. You'll find the answers there." Naomi took a deep breath, steeling herself. She knew there was no turning back. Her father had gone to great lengths to keep this place hidden from the world, and from her. But now, she was standing at its threshold. The truth, the key, the long-buried secrets of her father's life, they were all within her grasp. The gates slowly creaked open as a security team, dressed in black, waved them through. Naomi couldn't help but feel like she was stepping into another world, a world that had existed just beneath the surface of her reality. As they drove deeper into the compound, she saw guards stationed at regular intervals, their eyes scanning every movement. This was no ordinary place. This was a high-security facility, and Naomi had no idea what kind of operation her father had been running here. The car stopped in front of an unassuming building at the center of the compound, a large, nondescript structure that could have easily been mistaken for an office or storage facility. David led Naomi inside, his footsteps echoing in the cold, sterile hallway. The air was thick with tension, and Naomi could feel it pressing in on her from all sides. They reached a small elevator at the end of the corridor. The doors opened with a soft chime, and Naomi stepped inside, the metallic walls reflecting her anxious expression. David pressed a button on the control panel, and the elevator descended with a hum. As the elevator sank lower and lower into the earth, Naomi's nerves flared. The air grew colder, the silence more oppressive. She wondered just how far down this bunker went, and how much of the truth her father had buried. When the elevator finally stopped, the doors opened to reveal a dimly lit hallway, its walls lined with reinforced steel doors. Naomi's breath caught in her throat. This was it, the heart of the secret her father had kept from her. The hallway stretched on, endless doors behind each one, each hiding its own secret. David led her down the corridor, his footsteps steady and unwavering. They stopped in front of a heavy steel door at the far end. It was old, the paint chipped and worn from years of disuse. The key. Naomi's fingers tightened around the small silver key that had brought her here. She had no idea what she would find on the other side, but she knew that it was the only way forward. David turned to her. "This is it. Everything you need is behind this door. But be warned, Naomi. What you find may change the way you see your father, the world, and yourself." Naomi nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She had come this far. There was no turning back now. She slid the key into the lock and turned it. The door creaked open with a heavy groan, revealing a dark, expansive room beyond. Naomi stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the low light. The room was vast, filled with rows of old computers, monitors flickering with static, and shelves laden with files and documents. But it wasn't the technology that caught her attention, it was the large, circular table in the center of the room. And on the table, there was a single object. It was a large, ornate book, its cover embossed with strange symbols and intricate designs. The moment Naomi laid eyes on it, she felt a chill run down her spine. She knew, instinctively, that this was the key to everything. The answers she had been seeking were hidden within its pages. As she reached for the book, a voice interrupted her, low and cold. "You shouldn't have come here, Naomi." Naomi froze. She turned slowly to see her father standing in the doorway, his face hardened, his expression unreadable. The shock of seeing him there, in this hidden place, was almost too much to bear. He looked different, older, more worn, but there was no mistaking the presence of the man she had once loved. Dad, she whispered, her voice trembling. What is this? What's going on? He stepped into the room, his eyes never leaving hers. It's time you knew the truth.